Hello, welcome everyone to our 2020 holiday party. We're so glad that you're here tonight. I'm Andy Cobb, President of your Greater Dayton Area League of Women Voters. Tonight we have a unique experience. We've summoned some special guests from the past to take us back to Dayton 1920, before women had the right to vote. Our guest narrators for the evening are Minnie Stanley, first president of the Greater Dayton Area League of Women Voters. Minnie served as our president from 1920 until 1932. And Jessie Davison, the first vice president of our league, and the main force in the women's suffrage movement in Dayton. She was also the honorary vice president of the State of Ohio Women's Suffrage Association. Ladies, it's so nice to meet you.
Well, hello, Andy and Jessie. It is so nice to see you again. Can you believe here we are in 2020 and our country is celebrating its 244th birthday?
Hello, everyone. And Minnie, great to see you too. But we cannot forget, women have only had equal rights in the United States for 100 of those years. For 144 years, women had to live under circumstances and laws they had no power to change, at least until we came along.
Well, that is why we are here tonight. We want to honor and share the experiences of a time when women harnessed the grit of their feminine soul and selflessly stood up, not for themselves alone, but for their daughters and for the generations of women who would come after them. And also to recognize how far women have come these last 100 years.
Let us think back to the turn of the century. Women's suffrage was an issue that sparked so much emotion, and Dayton was right in the thick of it. Women were so frustrated and had been letting their feelings be known for years. Remember that incident on Old Troy Pike?
Oh, I remember. The Dayton Herald wrote all about it. The article was entitled, "Women's Right in Dayton as it is practiced today."
That was some ride. 4 ladies enjoying a buggy ride when they were forced off the road by that man driving a wood wagon. Just about destroyed their buggy.
Poor man. Did he really think that the woman would let him get away with that? Those ladies followed him on foot and heckled him all the way back to town. Then they saw to it he was placed under arrest, fined, and forced to pay for their damaged wagon.
I remember reading the headline in the newspaper. Ladies of Dayton were not to be fooled around with. And they were right.
Women had known for a long time the only way to change the unfair laws that governed their lives and protect themselves was to get the right to vote. And then we hoped we would elect men who would make better laws.
It was hard to convince Dayton's white men that equality for women would be a good idea. I can still remember them complaining.
In politics, there is struggle, strife, contention, bitterness, heartburning excitement, agitation, everything which is averse to the true character of women.
Do you want the old type of lovable helpmate whose greatest interest is making the home beautiful, the children helpful and obedient, and the entire household what it should be, the nearest thing to heaven of any spot on earth? Or do you want your better half and her female counterparts engaged in the work of governing, with all the hours and the drudgery that goes with it?
Oh, and don't forget that Edward W. Boak, editor of the Ladies' Home Journal.
The average American woman is indifferent to the voting issue. She likes her books. She is fond of music. She may have a taste for pictures. That woman is busy. She has not an idle hour of the day. You cannot interest her in extraneous subjects because there are too many things of a vital nature that are strictly woman's own that take up her time.
And then there were our friends, the aunties.
If women were granted the right to vote, women would be corrupted by politics, and chivalry would cease to exist.
If women become involved in politics, they would stop marrying or having children. The human race would die.
Mrs. Harry E. Talbot, as president of the Dayton branch of the Ohio State Association opposed to women's suffrage, she always had something to say.
We believe the men know what they want to do, and they ought to be able to express themselves without interference. We think the women have enough to do to attend to their household duties properly without mingling to outside affairs. Suffragettes advocate sex freedom, easy divorce, trial marriage, take care of children, birth control, and other destructive theories. Women should stay at home and rear their children properly to lay the foundation of good citizenship and all that makes the good government in a man.
But you sure took the wind out of her sails.
Our friends, the aunties, are fond of referring to the household pedestal upon which women have been placed. Isn't it about time this old pedestal rhetoric was stripped to the facts? Isn't it about time to admit that most of the dirty work of the world is done by women? Are the washing of foul linen, the scrubbing of floors, the cleansing of dirty dishes, tasks which befit a creature too fine or too frail to go to a polling booth and cast a vote?
Oh, the summer of 1912 was a year to remember. Dayton streets were full of excitement, soapbox speeches on downtown corners, parades of women dressed in white, carrying banners, and dealing with more than a few violent confrontations. The Dayton Journal called us dangerous to polite society.
Dayton was a battleground for the cause. After all, this is where Ohio's first Suffrage Association was formed. In 1912, 5 states, including Ohio, had the 23rd Amendment for the women's suffrage on the ballot. Ohio was called the swing state, being one of the first of the 5 to vote on women's rights. But we were ready.
I remember our first meeting in May. There were about 300 of us who met in the East Room of Memorial Hall. That day we decided we should have permanent offices, and we rented those 3 rooms in the Victoria Theater building. Then you, Jessie, were elected chairman of the Women's Suffragist Association.
Yes, but you really opened up the movement by including our diverse community. You knew it would broaden our voting base.
I remember handing out those assignments. Mrs. Welliver, will you work with the Hungarians? Rose Schneiderman, we are assigning you to factory workers. Mrs. Thresher, you are assigned to National Cash Register girls. Mrs. Julia Higgins and Miss Hayley Brown, as you are so prominent and well known in the city, you would be best to lead the Black community.
Your organization and efforts gained us support from key Black leaders, labor unions, and the Dayton Journal. By working together as allies and partners, we did so much more than they thought women could do.
Remember the news reports that summer? The Dayton Daily News opened its pages equally to all sides.
The antis are opposed to the movement and indifferent to voting because they preferred reading books and listening to music, enjoying photographs, and could not be bothered with extraneous things that were not vital to their nature. Besides, politics is dirty business, and women shouldn't be involved in the political process, lest they soil themselves.
I will never forget your response.
Women need this right for their highest mental and spiritual development. It makes them broad-minded and more sympathetic with other women's differences. The woman in industry needs the vote for her self-protection and that of her children as much as does the working man. Would he be willing to resign his right of self-expression? Ask him.
We were so busy. Our association gave over 150 speeches and distributed thousands of letters and pamphlets. Remember the posted placards on streetcars? And the booth at the arcade where we stationed ourselves to sell or sometimes just give away our literature. But it was not always pleasant. Remember the local police and firemen's annual picnic in Cooper Park? Margaret Foley of Boston was with us, and when we began to address the attendees, we were drowned out by catcalls. They even began throwing bits of food at us. Miss Foley was so angry, she made sure her anger was heard through the news.
The city of Dayton furnished the first audience that has ever greeted me with violence.
I do remember that picnic, but I also remember the evening of September the 3rd, when we gathered at 4th Street near Ludlow to read the Dayton Daily News election night bulletins. Despite all our work and high hopes, the 23rd Amendment suffered sounding defeat at the Ohio polls. Our hopes for gaining the vote were crushed.
But that was short-lived. We kept right on working. Remember March 3rd, 1913? We all headed to Washington, D.C. to march in a parade. We wanted to let our new president know women's rights were not to be forgotten. We chose that date because it was the day before the inauguration of Woodrow Wilson, and Washington would be crowded with media and visitors. I bet we had 8,000 women from across the country descending on Washington, black and white women together. Poor Mr. Wilson arrived at Union Station waiting for a big mob to welcome him, and no one was there. He was told everyone was on Pennsylvania Avenue watching women make a spectacle of themselves.
I remember the shame I felt when the National Women's Suffragist Association decided to relegate black women to the back of the parade to avoid offending Southern white suffragists. I was so proud of Ida B. Wells of the Alpha Suffrage Club. She outsmarted them by leaving the back of the parade and made her way up the sidewalk. When her Illinois delegation marched by, she joined them and marched between her white friends, Bella Squire and Virginia Brooks, to the finish. That was one victory. Unfortunately, the police did not do much to protect us from the rowdy crowd. Women should never face such physical and verbal abuse, and objects thrown at us to disturb the parade. I do say, all the protesters accomplished that day was to cement our resolve.
We returned home more determined than ever to fight for our rights, at least for a few weeks, before the flood of 1913 hit our city. The destruction of Dayton was a call stronger than our goals. We were right to sideline our work for a while and donate our efforts and monies to the relief efforts of our friends and neighbors. And Jesse, there was our Mr. Patterson, truly a rainbow after the storm, and such a staunch supporter of our work. I am not quite sure what we would have done had he not donated the office space to the Suffrage Association.
Ah, yes, the Schwind building on Ludlow Street.
My dear Miss Davison, it would be my dearest pleasure to encourage your work for suffrage with this, a gift of $2,400. I further promise to provide a stipend of $400 a month for 1 year to sustain your movement.
He meant well, Jesse, and he did listen to your counteroffer.
We thank you for your generosity, Mr. Patterson, but we will not be reliant on your generosity alone. We accept your offer, but pledge to match these donations up to a sum of $1,200.
He did rally the male leaders in Dayton behind the scenes to support our efforts. Let's see who he brought around to our side. Colonel Edward Deeds, Bishop Milton Wright, Orville Wright, Frederick Reich, Charles Kettering, and former Dayton Mayor E.E. Burkhart.
He presented us with those little lantern slides, 144 of them, small color pictures highlighting the work of our local movement. I believe he said they were painted with the tip of a feather for us to use at presentations.
Those slides were works of art. Mr. Patterson was disappointed when he found we were not using them. Didn't he inquire?
My dear Miss Davison, I'm perplexed to find your organization is not making use of the lantern slides prepared for your community presentations. Is there a problem I need to further address to be of assistance?
I replied, your letter of January 8th is received and has relieved my mind of much of the sting which your remarks had unavoidably caused. I feel it only just to the Suffrage Association to repeat what I said in the lecture hall, that the reason for not having used the slides more than we did is because the pictures were chiefly of parades. We didn't feel they were effective.
You were surprised Mr. Patterson ordered NCR to make all new, more appropriate slides, of course, under our supervision and direction.
And I wrote back to him, Mr. Patterson, we are very glad to be in receipt of the new slides and will follow your suggestion to incorporate them into speeches whenever possible.
But we put that behind us. Remember June 16, 1919? The 19th Amendment, the Susan B. Anthony Amendment, was ratified by the Ohio General Assembly by a vote of 74-5. And on the same day, the Ohio Senate ratified the amendment by a 27-3 vote.
Both houses also passed a presidential suffrage bill, which would ensure Ohio women could vote in the 1920 presidential election. It was not long after that that Carrie Chapman Catt decided that women should soundly embrace their new rights and founded the League of Women Voters. She challenged women nationwide by asking,
"Now you have the vote. What will you do with it?"
Oh, and we wasted no time throwing open the doors of our Dayton League, making ours one of the first in the nation. And at that time, Mr. Patterson forever cemented his faith in our organization. What was that he said?
The hope of political regeneration in this country lay in the work of the League of Women Voters.
I was so excited to help organize the direction of our new league. From its infancy, I felt its significance and purpose. We were determined to become a real education factor in the city. It was not long before we trained 40,000 Montgomery County women to be voters and to use the ballot in the upcoming election. And yes, with the help of John Patterson, women were trained to vote at NCR headquarters.
I remember our parade marching down Dayton's Main Street, all new female voters. Once on our feet, it was a relief to stop receiving further stipends from Mr. John Patterson. After all our work, what a pleasure to shun the idea of our league being supported by men and to step up our efforts to be more self-sufficient. Men did not think we could do it, but we did. With our white elephant sales and festivals and selling household items, books, and baked goods.
We also decided to produce and sell our own newspaper, the Dayton Woman Citizen. The paper supported itself and the league with advertisements from the suppliers of Sunshine Milk Products, the White Baking Company, Dayton Dairy Made Butter, always fresh, pure and sweet, and other products we thought to be beneficial to the home. Oh, and remember Charlotte Mary Conover and her suggestions to promote fiscal responsibility? She printed her advice in the Woman's Citizen.
For the prosperous, give the quota outright, then give a little more. Feed the family stew instead of porterhouse, carrots instead of cauliflower, oleomargarine in your cakes instead of butter. But wives and mothers, keep it dark. Do not confide in your family. What they do not know does not hurt them. Pass those little weekly savings on to the league.
But as exciting as this was for our white faction of women, unfortunately, our black counterparts who had worked diligently by our side were still denied their voting rights. Those men had other ideas about the 19th Amendment, and because of their shenanigans, Susan's beloved amendment stating, "The right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex," no longer guaranteed every woman the vote.
No, instead, laws reserving the ballot for black men became unconstitutional based upon age, citizenship, residency, mental competence, and more that would keep them from the polls. Black women, however, navigated a maze of state laws, and they showed up to register to vote in the fall of 1920, even though they confronted many hurdles. Racism, of course, was the most significant.
But in the fall 1920, black women showed up at the polls and did manage to vote. They argued that they had been exercising that right for several years in states like California, Illinois, and New York, where women's suffrage became law before the 19th Amendment was ratified, and they were not about to give up those rights. When those registrars opened their books to women that fall, Black women gathered their courage and their savvy and insisted on the right that the 19th Amendment promised.
I remember Mary McLeod Bethune of Florida had encouraged Black women to register. She met with such brutal opposition every step along the way. Nonetheless, Black women joined voters' rolls, even though the intimidation continued. Those Ku Klux Klansmen marched onto the grounds of Bethune's girls' school, aiming to scare Black women away from the polls. But the women turned out to vote anyway. They took their courage from leaders like Bethune and each other.
I am proud that in Dayton, Black and white women worked together to advance our common agenda. In our speeches and brochures, we made clear that Dayton suffragists wanted the vote for every woman.
In one advertisement, we declared all women need the vote because it is the accepted method of self-expression in a democracy. We spent a lot of time trying to convince white men and women that all women having the right to vote was important. What was most unique was our partnerships with Dayton's working class, immigrants, and Black women. The national suffrage leaders saw that as a disadvantage. We never did. We viewed any support as an asset, and we were right. With our partners, women ran the Women's Information Booth in the Dayton Arcade. Black women took charge, proving to all we could truly work together for a common cause.
We were so fortunate to have with us Ms. Julia Higgins. What a dynamic civic leader and community activist. She fought diligently and accomplished the goal to get colored teachers employed in the colored community of Dayton. She founded the Unique Study Club and was the treasurer of the Colored Citizens Protective Association. Julia was also one of the first Black women to be a Red Cross nurse, attending to World War I veterans. And she led a successful fundraising campaign for the YMCA. Not to mention her work in the Dayton Women's Suffrage Association campaign at the Dayton Metropolitan Library. Such a great leader.
I am pleased to report that the colored women of Dayton, under my direction, have been requested to take charge of the information booth on Mondays. Additionally, both white and colored suffragists have been delivering speeches not only in our individual communities, but in each other's as well. Despite some opposition and indifference, much good has been accomplished.
Oh, do not forget Hayley Q Brown. We called her Miss Hayley, and she was world-renowned as a social activist. You remember she was born to freed slaves and moved not too far from Dayton to Wilberforce. She even graduated from Wilberforce University and went on to study in New York and Paris. We were fortunate she returned to Ohio to teach in Dayton Public Schools, also Central State University and Wilberforce. Later, she was Dean of Women at Tuskegee Institute in Alabama. Miss Hayley always challenged Black women to regard the ratification of the 19th Amendment as an opening for an acquisition of power.
Let us remember that we are making our own history, that we are character builders, building for all eternity. Let us not ask, what shall we do with our newly acquired power? Rather, what manner of women are we going to be? We stand at the open door of a new era. For the first time in the history of this country, women have exercised the right of franchise, the right for which the pioneers of our race fought but died without the sight.
Unfortunately, it took 4 more decades until the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Finally, 45 years after the 19th Amendment was passed, Black women and men finally received their right to vote without racial discrimination. President Lyndon B. Johnson signed the act at the height of the Civil Rights Movement. Congress later amended the act 5 times to expand its protections to enforce the voting rights guaranteed by the 14th and 15th Amendments of the Constitution. At the time, the Voters' Rights Act was considered the most effective piece of federal civil rights legislation ever enacted in this country.
After 209 years, every woman in the United States had the right to vote, though you know, women are still facing challenges. But I have been noticing that today, women are the largest, most proactive voting bloc. In midterms from 2013 to 2018, 53% of voters were women, while only 47% were men. By 2018, a record 102 women were serving in the House of Representatives and sent 5 women to the Senate.
Women have been setting milestones in Congress for decades.
1916, Jeanette Rankin, Montana's first woman elected to Congress.
1964, Patsy Mink, first Asian American elected to Congress.
1968, Shirley Chisholm, first black woman elected to Congress.
1973, Yvonne Burke, first Congresswoman to give birth while in office.
1992, Carol Moseley Braun, first black woman elected to Senate.
2007, Nancy Pelosi becomes the first woman to serve as Speaker of the House.
And in 2016, a woman, Hillary Clinton, ran for President of the United States.
And we cannot forget Kamala Harris, not only the first woman Vice President-elect, but also the first African American and South Asian American senator. So nice to witness the generations of women who followed in our footsteps, taking women from the kitchen to the Senate.
I agree. As Elizabeth Cady Stanton said, the best protection a woman can have is courage. The work for equality for women continues. May we continue to be courageous.
Before you leave, ladies, I'd like to tell you a little bit about some of the work we've been doing.
Oh, please do.
We have found building partnerships and community relationships is so important to expand our reach into the community. Some of our partners are UD Lifelong Learning, Women's Therapy Court, Dayton Public Library Systems, RTA, MVCC, DATV, YWCA, House of Bread, and our work with
students. Yes, we know about your work with Sinclair Community College, Wright State, Central State, Wilberforce, the University of Dayton, and is it the Western Ohio Girl Scout program? And you partnered with the Ohio Secretary of State, Frank LaRose.
And do not forget those media people. We only had 2 newspapers in our time. Now we have a presence on WDTN, WHIO, Think TV, NPR, and those candidate interviews on DATV and Miami Valley Communications Council. Why, you even have your own monthly television show on DATV.
And don't forget those airwaves. WYSO, iHeartRadio, and National Public Radio.
Let me tell you about the signature program we started to highlight women.
Dangerous Dames of Dayton.
You've heard of it?
The authors, Ellen Goodman, J. Newton Small, Eileen Weiss, Connie Schultz, Susan Page.
The role models, General Wolfenbarger, Supreme Court Justice Melody Stewart, Chief Justice Maureen O'Connor.
Yes, and we honored the first African-American Olympian living right here in Dayton, Lucinda Williams Adams. We even had a street named after her.
And you have carried on one of our traditions as well. In our day, we called it the Dayton Woman Citizen. I believe today you call it the Voter's Guide.
We do, and we print it in English and Spanish.
You make us proud.
You showed us the way. Before you leave, though, let each of us raise a glass in tribute to the women who have come before us, to Minnie and Jessie. As Susan B. Anthony once said, forget conventionalisms. Forget what the world thinks of you stepping out of your place. Think your best thoughts, speak your best words, work your best works. Look to your own conscience for approval.